Hello, I'm King Link, and let's talk about grind as gameplay. Really, today, I just want to talk about something that bothers me, grindy games. For the video, I'm actually going to be showing off a couple games here of a certain genre. I'll start with one of the most famous, the creator of the genre, really, Cookie Clicker. We're also going to be taking a look at Clicker Heroes, Realm Grinder, and my pseudo-favorite game, NGU Idle. Now, these are all of the genre incremental games, or idle games. Both names fit all of these games. I will talk about them at the end of the video, but if there's one thing this genre is known for, it's grinding. I'm just going to put that whole piece aside though, and spoiler, I do like these games and the genre as a whole. So, with that said, what is grind? Well, the Oxford Dictionary says it means to gyrate your hips erotically. You know, maybe I'm coming around to this idea. But really, allow me to define it for games. Grindy games are games where you do repetitive actions over and over to work your way through some goal, achievement, or to make progression. There's a lot of caveats and asterisks with that statement there, but let's throw a huge net and catch everything and then look at what we have. Now let's say that the grind can be anything from waiting for health energy to come back, killing millions of the same enemies over and over as in Dynasty Warriors, playing many multiplayer matches to achieve some small goal, and pretty much any multiplayer game out there with progression, gaining a small amount of points or coins for larger goals such as Tsum, or clicking a cookie 100 times to unlock a farm in Cookie Clicker. You know, the big thing though is grinding games require the player to do repetitive actions over and over, whether it be to beat a level, hope for some item to drop like in EDF, Diablo 3, or really any number of games. But really, if we think about it enough, life is a grind. I mean, I write one letter at a time in this document, speak one word to you, I earn $1 at a time and eventually hope to earn more. I write one line of code at a time and hope it makes a bigger program. The idea of grind is nothing new. And honestly, I mean, if we really go back to it, Pac-Man is just eating a single pellet each time. So what's the big deal? Well, the problem is not just grinding. I mean, ultimately, every game has some level of grind in it. The problem is when grind becomes a core gameplay mechanic. Now, an easy example of this is RPGs. Now, not every RPG has this problem, but if we're honest, most do. But let's talk Final Fantasy, and really any of them fit this. But for the extreme example, how about the optional bosses at the end of Final Fantasy VII? But also maxing the materia system in the same game. Or maybe Final Fantasy IV's hunting for that 1 in 64 chance of appearing enemy that drops the pink tail for completionists everywhere. Now the thing is, overall, RPGs always have gotten away with this grinding, whether it be to get to a certain level, maxing materia, or even just hunting those items. Now, I know some RPG fans will be angry that I'm calling out that genre. I've had this conversation multiple times in person, but honestly, RPGs tend to be time wasters. A lot of them have entirely too many enemies, and by that I mean enemy encounters only, not unique enemies. When you've killed the same guy 20 to 30 times in a row without taking a single point of damage or using any abilities, does that enemy really challenge you anymore? And yeah, you do that to gain levels to be more powerful, but RPGs could just double the rewards for a battle and half the number of encounters that you have to go through. It could also lower the levels of the bosses, and so on. There's many ways to solve this problem. The fact is, RPGs tend to be grindy by design and to get game length out of it. It's the design here, though, that I'm taking offense with. Now, I did grow up with RPGs. I still enjoy them. Final Fantasy VI is my favorite. I do still want to play Ni no Kuni 2, though the grindy parts are one of the reasons I really haven't tackled many RPGs, because, well, I'm not sure if it's just repetitive battles for very long playtime, or if it's something like Witcher 3, which did have a massive sum of content for a 60 hours RPG-ish game. The same is true for games like The Record of Agarist War, if I'm saying that right. Even if the idea of the game is breeding my characters together, it sounds interesting, but if it's 80 hours just for the main story, how much of that is done doing interesting pieces of the game? The problem is, time spent in a game isn't a measure of quality. I've been on both sides of this argument, mind you, and game length is important, but also it's important to note like Witcher 3 being 60 hours doesn't make Witcher 3 a great game. Now, Witcher 3 being constantly great for the entire 60 hours is what makes Witcher 3 a great game. I can go make a game where you have to sit there and watch it for like 100 hours, maybe just holding down a button, but that doesn't make for a compelling amount of gameplay, even if it is 100 hours long. Now, my major issue with grindy games, especially those that use grind as a core mechanic, is that the game's length doesn't come from gameplay, but rather a repetition of gameplay. Now, if you love Call of Duty, playing 1,000 matches to unlock levels, doodads, prestige, it won't be a horrible experience for you. Multiplayers have gotten away with this repetition for many years because it's part of the experience and expected. And you know what? I do give the multiplayer games a pass. My problem is a lot of games do this for single player also. Final Fantasy with the repetition of the same enemies over and over. Diablo 3 gets away with it by making players have to chase gear and rarity systems. Samurai Warrior 4 and 4.2 got away with it by having each character have to go play through the same story missions to get a perfect completion or an achievement. The reason I find it really infuriating, though, is that a lot of times it's artificially lengthening the game without making it a better experience. Let me give you a very simple example. If the Resident Evil 2's remake came out and there were twice as many corridors that looked exactly the same, just duplicated, or even if Leon's walk speed was halved, it would make the game twice as long, but not twice as good. The thing is, grindy games do this type of thing all the time. You beat that level, well, beat it again at a slightly harder difficulty to show that you've mastered it. Fight the same enemy over and over, you need more experience levels. Or go chase this currency so you can go buy this artificial need. The thing is, this isn't game length that I have an issue with. If Final Fantasy VII's story was twice as long, it would have taken a ton of work for the developers to do that and hopefully be twice as interesting. But if they wanted to double the length of Final Fantasy VII, it's just as easy to double the chance of an enemy encounter in the game, and half the rewards given by that enemy. You get the same challenge from the game, but it will take longer to beat. You can also do this by doubling the number of levels in an area. It doesn't make for a deeper game, it just makes for more game that you have to go and walk through. Now, mechanics that I would call grindy tend to be mechanics that cost the development team minimal time to implement or tweak, and the player a long time to play through. Thus, the repetition is really at the core of these issues. Now, you can also think of it this way. Not many people will complain about a game story is grindy. I've actually never heard that criticism. There are probably a couple exceptions. Please feel free to let me know down in the comments the games you think are grindy for story. But overall, it's not a common criticism because the developers tend to spend just as long working on a story as the player does to go through it. They might call it long-winded or boring, but not necessarily grindy. But then, hey, let's kill 100 rats to proceed. That's a really grindy quest, because it only requires the developer to create one rat model and then spawn it at a fixed rate, and it means they can control the speed of progression, but also have the player do something that sounds meaningful, but really is just a pointless treadmill. Now, most of the time people will call games grindy, it's for systems like that. But for me, either multiple quests that take very little thought or effort to make, like fetch quests for instance, or just copied and pasted instructions over and over, or repetitive actions that are done for some reward. Now, I have of course heard a defense of grind as gameplay, and I can somewhat see it, but I think it's a flawed thought. The big one is games like Warframe or Diablo 3 where grind is important, or grind gets you farther, or grind is what you come for. What? No, you come and play Warframe because it's a great shooter, good controls, and while the levels are similar, there are a lot of different tasks to go after. When you're sitting there and playing the same mission 10 times in a row, hoping for something specific to drop for progression, that means something's probably gone wrong. That's just my opinion, but that's really a strange thing to ask for, to grind. Similarly, Diablo 3's first playthrough is really good, and honestly, the way they handle the post-game is usually pretty good as well. But the problem is, the grind to get better gear, to get farther, to get better gear, and so on is problematic. In fact, both of these games, and really this topic, is on the fringe of a major issue I brought up before. Grind is being added into games, and microtransactions are being offered to improve the experience. There are items in Warframe that players tend to grind, but Warframe also offers the ability to just buy those items now for a reasonable price. Diablo 3 doesn't have microtransactions right now as far as I know, but hey, remember the real money auction house? Yeah, you paid real money to get better items from other players, and Blizzard of course took a nominal cut. I mean, that's the problem right there with microtransaction systems. Now, does anyone remember what happened after the real money auction house in Diablo 3 shut down? Well, first, the gold auction house was still around, so the auction house existed in some form. But suddenly, players were giving more items for their current character class. The game was made less grindy because it was less profitable to do so. That's something to think about. Similarly, there are games that allow you to grind currency or buy it. Those tend to have the same problem, and a lot of times there's psychology added in. How long will you grind to get X? How can we make you pay for a second X because you want it? Grind as a core gameplay construct is a bit iffy, though I would say it's a negative. Now, grind as a core gameplay construct when money is involved, that's a huge red flag. So, grind as a gameplay is bad. Yeah, I mean, there are cases of it working, and let's be honest, some grind in RPG is of course fine. Some grind is okay. There's still grinding in Diablo 3. I don't love it, but some people do, and Dynasty Warriors is very grindy. You'll probably hate it, but me, I love it as a series. But there's another way to look at this grind. What about grind as a gameplay element? You've been watching me play 4 games here. They're all called incrementals or idle games. But here's the thing. I chose all 4 because they're, well, to be honest, grindy. But when I play Cookie Clicker, I admit I don't really think about how grindy it is. I usually think more of how long it takes me to reach the next tier, goal, factory, or when should I extend and start over to get more powerful. You see, in incremental games in general, grind exists, and of course it's bad. But unlike most of these examples, where the grind is just something to do to get some reward or get some progression, incrementals tend to treat grind as a villain, one you will constantly be fighting to win the game or accomplish some goal, whether it be 1 million cookies, the end of the story. Admittedly, these 4 games don't have it, but Space Plan, another idle game, does. And there are games like Kittens or Candy Box that are similar, that have a ton of features that appear over time, and so on. Most incremental games tend to have a very small amount of actual gameplay, and it's the grind or the waiting for the rewards or unlocking these features that become the game. They might have a small adventure mode or something minor. There are a ton of one-offs I can mention. Anti-Idol and NGU have very simple adventure systems. Trimps has the player go to fight in little zones, and so on. But the one thing almost all these incremental games have is that automation quickly takes over. In fact, there are very few idle or incremental games that don't have some level of automation, so you can check back in 24 hours or 48 or whatever you want to do, and see how you've grown, maybe click a few buttons and let it run in the background. But the thing is, in almost every incremental game, minimizing or reducing the time it takes to grind something up becomes the key to the game. So, is grind good in the case of an incremental? Well, I mean, yes or no. It really depends on what you want, but if you think of them as the enemy, they're the challenge of the game. Are incremental games fun? Yeah, I mean, I really like them, especially if the novel or unique ones. I'm currently loving playing NGU Idol, and I'll probably break it down and review that when I'm run out of other games. I've played all of these games at some point. Cookie Clickers is still amazing. Realm Grinder is different and good, as is Clicker Heroes. I do know they're making a Clicker Hero 2, but that's in early access. I honestly haven't taken a dive yet. But of course, all of these games tend to also be time sinks or time wasters. As much as I like them, I'll be honest, they tend to be addictive in really odd ways, and watching the numbers climb is really the game. It reminds me of Progress Quest, the first true idle game back in the day, and honestly still one of the best at absolute idle. Now, are they problematic? Perhaps. I mean, like I said, they are huge time sinks and time wasters, and it definitely depends on the player. I might stare at NGU idle a bit much if I'm honest, and a lot of people try to play these games active. And while some of them, like Clicker Heroes, does allow that in some manner, the fact is these are games that you probably should be checking on every 24 hours, but you can play it any way you want, of course. So what can we really say about grind as gameplay? Well, unlike microtransactions, this isn't a topic people need to flip out about. If a game is grindy, definitely call it so. Developers really need to stop using grind as gameplay to extend games. It's not a very good system, it's used entirely too often, and it's often used with microtransactions. And games as a service really love to use grind in a bad way. But if you've enjoyed Diablo, you play Diablo, and you level up new characters or go through the story again. Gating it until you get certain drops or certain power systems, it's not good game design in my opinion. Let's just say that. But can you enjoy Diablo 3 because it has that? Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Diablo 3 doesn't annoy me that much because Diablo 3 is already a very fun game, and the grind is annoying, but you're still playing the core experience that you should be enjoying. Diablo really only gets grindy in the late post-game in my opinion, and the same is true for almost every multiplayer game I've found. The stuff I take issue with is more where you have to do a repetitive task multiple times to get back to the story, or earn progression in the main playthrough, or of course grind something instead of paying money. Now, this could be RPGs that crank meaningless encounter rates very high. I did call out Final Fantasy. I don't think they've done it that bad. There are other games that, better exemplify it. Or just games in general that don't value players' time. It's one thing if a game is very challenging and dangerous and you have to repeat sections, like Dark Souls, where you're memorizing the level as you play, and that's not really a bad grind necessarily. It's another thing if you're just chasing after some object you need to drop or having to play through the game like 30 times to get every achievement. EDF 4.1, I'm kind of talking about you here. So really, call out developers who do grind as gameplay with offers of microtransactions to speed up your progress in some way. That's never cool, and I think we can all agree on that and should know about it by now. Seriously, just respect the player. I mean, that's really what much of my complaints are on this issue. If it doesn't take you a long time to build, will a player want to do it ad nauseum? The answer is probably no, and in that case, maybe it's not good game design. And really, there we are. Thank you for listening. I wanted to get this off my chest, especially because we'll be talking about grind in my next review. I am working on a review of Forager. It's a fun little game, and we'll talk about how its grind works and everything else then. In addition, I want to throw out a little shout out, just calling out to our incremental games on Reddit. That's where I do talk about incremental games entirely too much, find out about new ones that I want to play, and so on. If you did enjoy looking at any of these games, or if you're curious about some of the incrementals I mentioned, the ones that are free, you can always check them out at your leisure. I'll try to put links in the description of all of them, as well as in the written review, and please consider joining our incremental games on Reddit to talk about them, or even new ones that are popping up. I'll throw a link there for that as well. And of course, if you've enjoyed this, consider subscribing to the channel. I'll keep on trying to do these little discussions. They take a short amount of time. Stuff's changing in my life, which means I should be able to do more of them from what it sounds like. We'll talk about that another time, probably very soon. Otherwise, I'll be back to review more before long. And until then, I am King Link. And of course, thank you for watching.